Hey guys, Michael Hyatt here. If you're watching the replay of this live Periscope broadcast, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. My name is Michael Hyatt. This is the Daily Mentor broadcast or scope, and my goal is to provide you with the clarity, the confidence, and the tools you need to win at work and to succeed at life. And today we're going to be talking about how to get unstuck, how to jumpstart that stuck project. We probably all have those kinds of projects. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I'm going to really amplify it today and take your questions, which is something we didn't have time for last time. So yeah, happy Friday to you too. Greetings. Awesome. Hi from Minnesota. Let's do this. Absolutely. Kathy, somebody calling in from Guatemala. Scott from Columbia, South Carolina. If you could put your name and where you're from in the comment box, that would be terrific. Hi from Texas. Hello from Seoul, Korea. Hello. Kate from Massachusetts. Lauren from Mississippi. Pam in Florida. Heart to you too, Pam. Champaign, France. Boy, going by so fast now. Clay from Laurel, Mississippi. David in Florida. Let's get unstuck. Absolutely. We're going to totally do that here. In case you don't know me, again, my name is Michael Hyatt. I'm the author of the New York Times book, Platform Get Noticed in a Noisy World. I'm also the proprietor of the website michaelhyatt.com, where I get about 1,000 page views a month. I also have a podcast on iTunes called This Is Your Life, where I get about 300,000 downloads a month. Probably the most important thing, though, is that I'm married to Gail. Gail and I have been married for 37 years. We've got 5 grown daughters. We've got 4 sons-in-law and 8, count them, 8 grandchildren. And I'm kind of a virtual mentor. You know, my goal really in life is to be able to provide the kind of clarity, the confidence, and the tools you need to win at work and, more importantly, to succeed at life. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is basically how you can jumpstart that stuck project. So here's what I'd love to hear from you before we get started. Number one, if you've got a project that you feel like you're stuck on, I don't care how big it is, how small it is, but you just can't seem to get the momentum going, give me some hearts. All righty. Fantastic. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is to complete this sentence. If I could just get going on blank and put the name of the project, it'd be a home run. Okay, so what's the project you need to get going on? So Kathy says a doctorate project. That's awesome. Somebody else says a new business. Clay says writing a book. I'm going to talk about that. Somebody else says a second book, an online academy, a website. What else? A vlog channel. Luke said that. Lynn says blogging. Eugene says a product, new book, blog, rebranding, super video, all that. Church building installed. Oh no. A book or a music CD. Kim says a medical spreadsheet. I'm sorry, Kim, that sounds boring. But it's probably got to be done, right? Epic says converting audio to book. Christy says tap on the screen for hearts. Yes, please. Okay, so let's talk about this particular topic. And I want to just tell you a little bit about this. Let me get my notes up here where I can read them. Like you, I occasionally get stuck on the projects I'm trying to create. And I just can't find the motivation, or I can't seem to find the time, which, by the way, is another version of the first problem, right? I mean, if you got the motivation, you're going to figure out the time part of it. All of us have 168 hours, and we make time for the things that are important to us. And Jeannie says, just arrived, I could use a little motivation. Well, you're in the right place, because that's exactly what I hope to do in this session. So occasionally I get to the feeling where I just can't get started either. So what I started doing, and this is a hack that's worked for me. I talked about it, I think, a couple weeks ago in one of my scope sessions. But today on my blog, I developed it in more detail because I had such a phenomenal response to it. And you can find that at michaelhyatt.com/jumpstart. So you can read all about it there. This is designed to really be a discussion that takes that a little further. So let me give you an example. When I wanted to start a podcast, now 3 years ago, never done a podcast, it sounded incredibly intimidating. I didn't know where to start, so I had a graphic artist create the album art, okay? And I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. When I decided that I was going to write this last book, it's my 8th book, and they're always hard. You know, for me, they don't really get any easier. It's still an enormous amount of work. Somebody once said that if you want to write a book, all you have to do is open a vein and bleed. You know, that's kind of what it is. I mean, you feel like it's an enormous amount of pain to produce a book. So what I did was I mocked up the New York Times bestseller list, and I put my new book, which comes out in March, at the very top of it. Really cool. And so, again, that was just a way to get me started and help me visualize the outcome. That's the key thing. When I wanted to create this studio, which is really part of a carriage house, as a part of our home, I decided not only to do the blueprints, but to take it a little bit further. So I took those blueprints to a 3D printer, and I printed up this really cool mock-up of the carriage house. I'm actually sitting inside that. I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm inside the carriage house broadcasting to you today. So the key thing is to be able to visualize an outcome that you want and then to begin to make it real. So when you do that, there are 6 advantages, okay? Vicki said that's so cute. I'm assuming you refer to the carriage house, right? Yep. Okay, so here's the 6 advantages that you get by doing this. I kind of used to think this would be cheesy. You know, people have these, what do they call them? Like visualization boards, you know, where they put their goals up, a vision board. And I always thought that was kind of cheesy, but I realized, no, that's tapping into something very important. And so here's the 6 advantages you get by beginning to visualize any goal or any project in its final state. Number 1 is that it makes it begin to become real, okay? So at first, the carriage house for me was just, just an idea. Then it became a blueprint, and so we had to work out a lot of stuff there. Then it became this, and then I began to really visualize it and really begin to see what it was going to look like when it was done, which brings me to the second advantage of doing this process, is that it ignites passion. You know, and I can begin to see it, whether it's album art or a book cover or a New York Times bestseller list or the finished blog or whatever it is I'm trying to create, whatever outcome I'm trying to produce in the world, it begins to ignite within me passion, which is another word for me for motivation. Now suddenly, everything within my being makes it want to come to pass. You know, I want to bring that into the world because now I've begun the visualization process. Third advantage is that it sparks creativity. For example, when I look at that list every day, the New York Times bestseller list, knowing my book's coming out next March, and I want it to hit number 1 on the New York Times list, it sparks my creativity because I keep asking myself this question. You might want to write this down. What has to be true today for me to take a massive step in the direction of this outcome? What has to be true today for me to take a massive step in the direction of that outcome? So the fourth benefit is that it forces clarity. So now it's not just sort of this amorphous blob that's kind of living in my head, and I sometimes have a vision of it, and a lot of times I get lost and I forget the destination. Once I have it visualized, I can clearly see the outcome. And that forces clarity. It forces clarity around the content. It forces clarity around my next actions. It forces clarity about what it is I'm trying to produce in the world. Another advantage is that it defines a path. I can begin to more clearly see how to get from here to there, to that outcome. Now, I'm going to be honest. I don't usually see the entire path. Like, to get a number 1 New York Times bestseller, I've got some ideas. I mean, I spent 30 plus years in the book publishing world, most recently as the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers. So I know a few things about publishing. I know a few things about what it means to get a book on the New York Times list. I'm going to tell you something. Every outing is a new day. Every time you swing for the fences, you know, it's a new pitch. Every time you try to get a book on the New York Times list, it takes a slightly different strategy. I can't see the whole path. But I know, for example, one of the things I did this last month is I need endorsements from heavy hitters. So I had to find the most well-known people I could find and ask them to endorse the book. And I'm pleased to report that I was able to do that. So I don't see the whole path, but I saw enough to know that I need to get endorsements, and that was the next step for me. So here's the 5th advantage, and the 6th advantage is it really encourages positivity. There's something about me seeing the finished project that just keeps me positive. Am I going to have setbacks? Yes. Did people turn me down for endorsements for my book? Yeah, I had a couple people that said no. They either didn't have the time or they didn't get the topic or didn't feel like they had expertise, but I still stayed positive because I have this New York Times list mocked up with my book at #1. So it's kept me positive and it's kept me in the game. I'm going to block that user there. Okay, so let me ask you a question. What questions do you have about this? Is there some issue for you as you're developing your projects that you think this might solve? Do you think this could be helpful to you? Maybe you could tell me that first. Could it be helpful? Just say yes in the comment box. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. The power of visualization. Absolutely. Yeah, let me recap. 6 advantages. It begins to make it real when you visualize the outcome. It ignites passion. Number 3, it sparks creativity. I'm looking at my notes, by the way, if you're wondering. Number 4, it forces clarity. Number 5, it defines a path. And number 6, it encourages positivity. What questions do you have? How do you get an endorsement when you are not known? This is from Choosing Today. You've got to build relationships. This is so key. People wonder, well, how do you get these endorsements if I don't know these people? Start to build a relationship. You've never had more access to celebrities and famous or semi-famous people than you do today. But the best way to get access is start being generous toward that person. For example, one of the people that I got an endorsement from was Seth Godin. And I just loved Seth's stuff. I loved his book. I loved his blog. And I just started tweeting out links to blog posts that really resonated to me. So after a while, I got known to Seth. You know, he recognized me as someone who was a person in his tribe that kept showing up and kept promoting his stuff. And that's a tremendous way to build a relationship. So if you want endorsements, who are the people in your field would you like to get them from? How can you get on their radar? How can you get noticed? By being generous. You know, it's more blessed to give than to receive. One of the most brilliant marketing strategies ever articulated. Fresh Slice Daily says, how do you keep from getting overwhelmed? I basically just chunk it down. You know, when I can see the finish line, when I can see the outcome, then the question is not everything I have to do, but what's the next right thing to do? I think I did a scope on that. You can look back in my archive, by the way, at michaelhyatt.com/scopes. All my scopes are there, and I did one on being overwhelmed. David says, can you walk us through how you visualize? Yes. So here's how I do it, David. I basically tried to think about what the final product might be, and you've got a lot of options here. You know, it could have been for me the blueprint on the carriage house. It could have been a picture of a house that was similar. You know, if you're trying to go for a weight loss goal and you have a graphic designer friend, you might get your head photoshopped on a thinner version of you. But to try to visualize the outcome. And so that's how it starts for me. That's how I visualize. And then I think, can I do something concrete? Something that I can look at every day. Maybe it's a screensaver. Maybe it's something hanging on my wall, but to make it concrete. Okay, somebody else says, this is Crystal. And by the way, if you put your name and 2 questions at the front of it, then your name and then your question, that'd be hugely helpful. Johnny Quinn says, do you share your goal with everyone or just your inner circle? Johnny, that is a really important question. And here's the deal. I do not share it with everyone. I used to think that was a smart thing to do. Like when I first started goal setting, I would post all my goals on my blog. The problem is that attracts naysayers. It attracts people that aren't going to support you, that are going to distract you and detract from the goal you're trying to reach. Worse, if you have seen that TED Talk, and I can't remember the guy's name, some of you may think of this, but he talks about goals. He was the founder of CD Baby, and he talks about the fact that when you say a goal out loud, that if you're not careful, you get the same psychological satisfaction as if you have actually accomplished the goal. So what I do instead is I share my goals selectively. I share them with people that can support me, people that will affirm me, people that will call out the best for me, and people that won't put up with excuses in my life. So people who are committed to my inner circle. If you agree with that, give me some hearts. Yeah, Derek Sivers, that's exactly right. Thanks, Vicki. Jason says, do you tell your tribe when you're near completion? Yeah, again, I'm kind of careful about that, but yes. Yes, I do. So for example, you know that this book is coming out. You also know that I wanted to hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. So I've kind of hung myself out there on this one, but I'm doing it for the sake of illustrating to you. Fred says, how do you do business with your competitors? Well, first of all, you got to I think it begins by eliminating that term in your language. It does. Our language will shape our reality. So I never refer to the people in my space that are doing the same thing or similar things to what I'm doing as my competitors. They're not. They're my friends. They're my colleagues. They're people I want to help. So I stopped using that language to begin with. I realize that we're all in the same industry together. We're roughly trying to do the same thing. And I love to exercise leadership in my industry by articulating a vision that's bigger than any one of us can accomplish on our own. And then I look for ways to be generous with them. I think that's how you win over competitors, make them your friends, and even your partners. That's even a better language. Or collaborators. Steve says, not competitors, but collaborators. Absolutely. Andy says, can you tell us how your circle of 10 works? Yeah, so I have something called the Inner Circle. And the Inner Circle is a paid mastermind. And you can actually go, I'm actually not going to talk about that today because we're going to be rolling out a new edition for 2016. We've made a ton of changes to it. I'm super excited about it. You guys will be first to hear. I'm sure I'll talk about it here first. So awesome. I'll do that then. Fred says, thanks. Kathy says, difference between vision board and what you've done. I don't know that it's different than a vision board, except that usually when I think of a vision board, I think of people putting words up there and then maybe cutting pictures out of a magazine that represent what it is they're trying to achieve. It may be a thing that they're trying to acquire or a certain level of status, or maybe it's a degree or something that physically or visually represents what it is, what's the outcome. I like that. I have nothing against that myself. I just tend to create things, like this or like the thing that hangs on my wall or a piece of album art or whatever. Georgia says, what if you need more people but can't afford? I think that was the question. First of all, have you ever met anybody that's in business who said, my biggest problem? I got too much money and I got too many people. What can I do? No, you never hear that, right? I've never heard that in my entire life. The truth is, resources are limited and they provide a really important constraint. So when you have limited resources, like I know you do, I do, you have limited resources, you've got a bigger dream than the resources you have, it forces you to be creative. So for example, when I started this business at Intentional Leadership, it was just me. I'd left Thomas Nelson Publishers, where I was the CEO. Now it was suddenly just me. I didn't even have an assistant. And I thought, I really can't afford all the people I need. So then I realized the magic of virtual assistants. And a company I recommend is EA, like executive assistant, eahelp.com. Go to them, tell them I sent you. But I started with them with an executive assistant at 5 hours a week. So it wasn't a lot of money. But when I could repurpose those 5 hours that I was spending doing things like booking my own travel, finding the FedEx box, all that stuff, and I've had an assistant that could do that, it freed me up to do only what I can do. The higher impact, high value activities that really can make a difference. Andy says, thank you. Your enthusiasm helped me today. I have big dreams, but felt stuck today. I am enthusiastic, and I want you to be enthusiastic. Josh says, what are your top 3 business priorities? Well, my top 3 priorities are vision casting for my own team, creating content, because I'm a content company. I run an online leadership development company. And then the third part is developing my team. So those are my top 3 business priorities: vision, content, team. So Permanent Leader said constraint, like setting an alarm for the end of the day. Exactly. How productive are you that last day before you go on vacation, when you've got to get it all done? Aren't you massively productive? Absolutely. Show me some hearts if you're massively productive on the last day. You know why you're massively productive on the last day before you go on vacation? Because you have a constraint. You have a deadline. The people that get stuck because they don't have enough resources, frankly, deserve to be stuck. Because you've got to get creative. This is for your good. You'll get way more character development, way more creativity in solving problems. Danielle says, how do you determine content? Well, I first look to my own expertise. What is it that I know how to do, either I know or know how to do, that would be helpful, that would add value to other people. Now, here's where you got to be careful. There's the curse of knowledge. You may be so close to your own expertise that you don't recognize it or value it for what it is. But the truth is there are other people out there in the world who would pay money, yes, real money, to know what you know or to be able to do what you do. Whatever that is, you're an expert in. Now, if you can't recognize your expertise because you think it's so familiar and think, well, everybody knows this, everybody can do this, ask your family, ask your friends, and that's what you can use. Okay, Robert says, how do you justify hiring someone to help when you're an employee and won't make more money? Well, that's a good question. You got a couple different angles there. One is you could go to your boss, make a case why hiring that additional employee will help your boss get what he or she wants. That's always how you sell a boss. You got to frame it in terms of how it's going to help them get ultimately what they want. I have in the past hired someone when I was an employee, and I just hired them to help me, to free me up, to do more stuff, believing that I would get a promotion if I could be more effective and more productive at what I was doing. Phil says, how do you keep the energy of it's your nature? Sorry, I don't understand that. Always so passionate with high energy. We appreciate you, Michael. Thank you, Sarah, for saying that. Bruce says, what tools do you use to flesh out your vision? Okay, so I use a couple different tools. Like I just, that New York Times bestseller list, I did that in iWork Pages. I could have done it in Word, but it's not anything fancy. I do a lot of stuff in Keynote, which is sort of Apple's answer to PowerPoint. It's just a tool I understand, and I can do graphic kind of stuff really quickly. W.A. Gentry says, I think Zig Ziglar would be smiling right now. Love Zig. Ron asks, you said, what has to be true today? Yes. This is an important thing when you're moving towards a destination you want to arrive at or trying to accomplish an outcome. What has to be true in order for me to get there? Now, to get a book as number one on the New York Times bestseller list, let me tell you how I thought about this. Okay, what has to be true first? Number one, I have to have a killer concept. So the book is called Living Forward, and it's a book about life planning. I've written on this. I know it resonates with people. I've spoken on the topic. I've done full-day seminars for companies on this topic. I know that it resonates. So I had a killer concept. Number two, I had to write a killer manuscript, a little bit tougher. You know, I took an entire summer, last summer, and wrote the manuscript. That was what was true then. Then I just started asking myself at every step along the way, what is the next thing that has to be true in order to advance me toward this outcome? Thank you, whoever said tap, tap, some heart appreciation. I appreciate that. So Phil says, how do you keep the momentum going when you're not a high energy person? Okay, I'm going to tell you guys something that's a dirty little secret. It's actually a wonderful secret. Dirty little secret's the wrong word. What if your energy level was not something you've just been dealt, but what if it's something you cause? What if you just decide, I'm going to be a high energy person? What would you do? If you were a high energy person, what would that look like? You know, you might think to yourself, well, I guess if I was a high energy person, I'd probably smile a lot. Do you know that when you smile, it releases, literally the physical act of just smiling releases endorphins in your body? It costs you absolutely nothing. It makes you more enduring to other people. It connects you emotionally with other people. So maybe that's an attribute of people that are high energy. Or like I've done, I got a stand-up desk. So I don't just sit down where I tend to go low energy, but I'm standing all the time. Added benefit, it burns a lot more calories than sitting on my butt all day. So just ask yourself the question, what do high energy people do? Like, by the way, I don't bounce all over like I'm doing right now. You know, when I'm working, I'm quiet. But I think of myself as high energy. And I've got some posts on my website at michaelhyatt.com. Just type in the search bar, energy. And I talk about things like nutrition, diet, relationships, thinking, other things that contribute to your energy level. So Milwaukee in the house. Great. PC Morris says, thank you for your answer. Sarah says, if we want to be something, make it happen. We create our reality. Yes, we have far more agency than you can possibly imagine. Clay says, do you outline your books, then fill in the gaps? Exactly. I start with the premise. What's the one thing I want to communicate? And then from there, I begin to develop the outline so that it serves that premise. Yeah, somebody said running gives me great energy. I went to the gym this morning. I worked out with my trainer, Mr. Andy Nelson, and he kicked my butt. You know, he worked me hard. Today we were working back and shoulders. It was a hard workout. I was tired. I was sweating. But when I got done, I was so full of energy. I've got the energy to this moment. So yeah, somebody mentioned The Power of Full Engagement. That's a tremendous book. If you haven't read that book, I would eagerly encourage you to do so. So somebody says, Tammy says, I just stopped and took a walk outside. Awesome. Rock says, Michael, are you going to run for president? I don't think we need more candidates in the race, but thanks for asking. What vitamins do you take? This is from Sugar. I do take a regimen of supplements, and it starts with, and by the way, I'm not a representative for this company, okay? My daughters work for this company, but I'm not a representative. They've just brainwashed me. But I take the multivitamins that a company called doTERRA produces, and there's 4 different ones. I can't quote the names to you, but that's just part of it. So Vicky says you'd make an amazing president. Well, thanks for saying so. I honestly can't imagine a worse job. A Preacher's Kid says, do you always know your chapters before you plot the book? Yes, I do. Now, they may change in the course of it, but I do an outline. And on my website at michaelhyatt.com, go to the store. I have 2 little ebooks, and I'm not trying to sell these. I don't care if you buy them or not, but I think they'd be helpful. It's called Writing a Winning Book Proposal, the nonfiction edition and the fiction edition, and I wrote them for people just like you who haven't thought about a book, but it'll help you create the blueprint. And you ought to do that whether you're self-publishing or going to a traditional publisher. So we're just out of time. What else? What am I missing? John, how often do you review the tasks you personally own and look to delegate or shift? I look at my task list every single morning, and there's a special way of categorizing the tasks that I delegate. Maybe I'll cover that at some point. Gene says, how are you finding advice? Gene, can you say more about that? I'm not sure I understand. Tanya, thank you, Michael. I'm a CEO on maternity leave. This is a great boost. Super. How do you keep the dream alive? I'm good for 2 weeks. I know. I have a whole process for that of keeping the dream alive. Maybe we can talk about that on another broadcast. So Mike says, sorry about the repeated posts. I'm in a coffee shop with spotty Wi-Fi. Hey, no problem. Tanya Rivera, 1103 says, congrats on the little one. Jamie says, I've been checking out the people on here, and there are a lot of pastors. Interesting. That is interesting. I have a heart for pastors and for people in ministry. That is a very hard job, and they need our support and encouragement. Tammy says, please tell us how to keep the dream alive. Okay, I'm going to tell you. It's actually not that simple. Once you have clarity on what the goal is, okay, you got to get clarity first. And you have to state the goal in a specific way. I have an entire course called 5 Days to Your Best Year Ever that talks about this, but I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version, okay? So you got to get clarity around the goal. Then the next most important thing you need to do to keep the dream alive is you've got to get crystal clear on the why. Why is this goal important to you? What's at stake if you achieve it? What do you lose if you don't? Get crystal clear on that. And if you get connected to the why and you're clear on the goal, that's one of the important components on keeping it alive. Drew says, the why tells you what to do. Yeah, that's one way to look at it, I think. Louisa says, how to stand out from others. Jean says, how do you get, build, or receive your advice? Well, the Bible says there's safety in a multitude of counselors. And I've got some key people that I've allowed into my life that advise me on all kinds of things. I have, for example, an amazing financial advisor who advises me on all things related to money. I've got somebody else in the business world that advises me there. But here's a key thing. In fact, I thought about doing today's podcast on this. Maybe I'll do it next week. And that is, there's one kind of person you don't want to let be an advisor. And that's the person who is not getting the results you want to achieve. So for example, you don't want to get financial advice from somebody that's broke. Duh. You don't want to take medical advice from somebody who's overweight and out of shape, or fitness advice. You don't want to take marriage advice from somebody who's got a lousy marriage. Now, that may not be fair, but that's just me. I want somebody that's living the results I'm trying to get, and then I want to imitate or copy what they're doing to get the same results. Somebody else says, everyone needs to join Platform University. Awesome. It's not open right now, but you can go to platformuniversity.com and sign up on the waiting list, and we'll let you know when it's open. Guys, You rock. Awesome to be with you this week. I hope you've got great plans this weekend. I hope part of those plans are to get some rest, get rejuvenated so you can hit it next week and make a huge difference. And remember, you've got a lot of time left today. Even if it's an hour, it's a blank canvas. So go out there and paint something beautiful. Make your life count. I'll see you, God willing, on Monday. Love you.